Good morning, Marianne.
Good morning, Amy.
Just the two of us right now, but I guess people will be popping in as they're able to join. Hopefully you saw my messages this morning.
I did.
Very good.
I had sent you an email. When I work from home, I have trouble signing in because I can't transfer it from my work to my home.
Oh, yes, I got that message and I will take care of that this afternoon.
Right,
No worries.
thank you.
You bet.
Amy, are you on several of these task force meetings?
Nope, this is actually my only assignment with the task force.
Okay. I was just wondering if other groups were finding this new rule so frustrating as we are.
Yeah, that's a good question. Not sure. I would imagine so.
Hi, Debbie. Hi, Mercedes.
Hello, good morning. Okay, it is 9 a.m. Taking a look at our list of folks. mostly seeing staff, so still seeing some of our task force members jumping on, so I'm going to give it another minute. Okay, I think our attendee list is starting to look good. Can I get a thumbs up if folks can see the screen? Awesome, thank you. Okay, so it's 9:02 and we're going to begin the meeting. We're going to start with a little roll call. And because it's Give Guide season, I wanted to have folks, when I call out your name to confirm that you're here, please share the last organization that you donated to. Doesn't have to necessarily be recent, could have been a couple of years ago, whenever the last time was you made a donation, and tell us who the organization was. So we're going to start with, okay, Swetha. You're first on my list.
Present, Swetha Bhakti, she, her pronouns with the governor's office. The last organization I donated to was the Palestinian Youth Movement.
Beautiful. Debbie.
Good morning, Debbie Dennis with DAS, Department of Administrative Services. And the last organization I donated to was this past Saturday, and it was the Northwest Youth Rodeo Association.
Heather.
Hi, I'm Heather Ficht. I'm the Executive Director of East Cascade Works, she, her pronouns, and the last place I donated to was a nonprofit called Changing Patterns that works with folks that are releasing from correctional institutions and helping them get back to civilization.
Kristen. Oh, okay, Kristen. Okay. Hoping somebody in the background can help with Kristen not being able to mute herself. I'm going to move forward and we'll try to come back. Tamara.
Good morning. My name is Tamara, and the last organization, I use she, her pronouns, sorry, that I donated to was actually last night. We had drag bingo, and it was a fundraiser for NEA, but really it was for our Two Spirit Safe Space Alliance. So I wanted to go and show my support.
Beautiful. Katrina.
Good morning, everybody. Katrina Holland, she, her pronouns, Urban League of Portland. Last place I donated to was the Black United Fund.
Thank you. Felicita.
Morning, everyone. Felicita Monteblanco, Northwest Health Foundation. I use she, her pronouns, and the last organization I donated to was Bienestar, which builds housing for our farm working families.
Thank you. Bettina.
Bettina Shenford, Ultimate Center for Children and Families. My pronouns are she, Z. And the last organization I donated to was the local NAACP when they had their Freedom Fund celebration.
Thank you. Marianne.
Hi, my name is Marianne Schleis. I work for St. Vincent de Paul in Lane County, Eugene, Oregon. And the last thing I donated to was a Albany firefighters fund for education of people in the nursing and firefighting fields.
Thank you. Leah.
Hi, my name's Leah Seavey, and I'm in Southern Oregon, and the last place I donated to was NeighborWorks Umpqua in Douglas County.
Beautiful. Helen. Maybe we don't have Helen here. Senator Campos. Okay.
I think Helen's here now.
Hi, sorry, I
Okay,
couldn't
I'll
get
come-
into the room, but I am
No
here
problem.
and I was listening on the phone. And the last, sorry, Helen Wong, she, her pronouns, from Meyer Memorial Trust. And the last organization I donated to was Doctors Without Borders.
Thank you. One more time for Senator Campos. Okay, Representative Conrad.
Morning, this is Charlie Conrad, and the last group that I donated to was Imagination Library.
Thank you. And Kristen, we'll come back to you.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I'm Kristen Galino. I'm with the Oregon Department of Justice. I use she, her pronouns. And the last organization that I donated to was for retiring racehorses.
Thank you. I think I'm the last one, Mercedes Solisole, and the last organization I donated to was Street Roots, but it's I have an automatic monthly donation that I give there, so it's always the most recent organization I've donated to. Okay, so it sounds like we have almost a full complement, only one absence today. We're going to go ahead and move into public comment. Do we have anybody who's here for public comment? Well, I'll give 2 minutes for each public commenter. You can use the raise hand function so we know where you are. I think we'll have to do the same thing that happened with Kristen, like you have to manually unmute folks, I think. Didn't need to raise my hand, I was just saying that. Okay. From this point forward, we are going to have public comment at the opening of every meeting. So if folks want to come and share some of their perspective about what we are doing, this will be the time that they'll have to do it. We'll also, folks will be able to send in written comment. We're asking that they send that to Amy. And then the written comments will then be shared with the group. And we do have a web page for this group as well, and we'll be able to store those documents there afterwards. So you'll probably get it in your email. And then we won't read out the public comments that are sent in written, but we will note when we do receive them so that you have an opportunity to review them. We're asking that folks submit those at least 24 hours in advance of the meeting to give folks time to review them before the meeting. And that will be an ongoing opportunity for the public to engage. Okay, so the next thing on our agenda is going to be some announcements. The first announcement is you should have gotten an email from Amy that had information about some mandatory trainings that we have to do. There were links in there for the trainings. We would really like for everyone to get those done before the December meeting. If you did not get that email or you cannot locate that information, please reach out to Amy right after this meeting to make sure that you have those links so that you have sufficient time to complete those trainings. At the last meeting, we also had questions about what makes up quorum and what makes up majority. We have gotten confirmation that 7 is a quorum and 7 is also our majority. For proxy votes at our last meeting, we did vote as a group that we wanted to allow for proxies to attend and vote in our stead if for any reason that we could not. We found out later on that we're not actually allowed to proxy out votes. So this is a public meeting, it is open. So if you ever can't attend and you want someone to attend in your stead, that is fine, but they won't be able to take votes for you. So sorry about that, but it was a nice little exercise in our voting, but we won't be able to have proxies do votes. And then lastly, I wanted to open up some space for Melinda Gross to introduce herself. She is a facilitator who is going to be able to be helping us out coming from DAS. Melinda, do you want to unmute and say hello to the group?
Sure, thank you. Melinda, she, her pronouns. I figured I should also answer the question prompt from earlier. So the last organization I donated to was like a organ donation kind of organization in Washington State. So just wanted to share that. I'm excited to be here. I'm just mostly here for support, for facilitation. I know that you might not hear a lot from me today. I might join future meetings. So I just wanted to make sure that I say hi. If you have questions of me, please reach out. You might hear my voice today for supports and anything you might need for facilitation of any conversation. So, and I work at DAS, Department of Administrative Services. I'm the Director of Cultural Change, and I do have a facilitation background. Sorry, my dog has a cone and is very reckless with it behind me. So that's also what you're seeing at the same time. So thank you for having me, and I'm excited to be here with you all.
Thank you so much, Melinda. We appreciate having you here for support. Okay, so before I move on, were there any questions about any of the announcements up on the screen right now? Always make that pause last just a little bit longer than it should. Give people a chance to unmute if they need to. So to bring us back into this space, one thing that I would like us to do is have just a small set of group agreements, just a way of grounding ourselves in how we want to interact in this space, how we want to support each other in this space. We're going to be together for almost a whole year. We've got a lot of work to get through, and I know that we've got tons of experience in this space. So what I've put up on the screen is just a draft of some of my kind of go-to group agreements, examples of things that have worked well for me in other spaces. And I would like to hear a little bit of feedback from this group on if these feel appropriate, if we have any edits or changes to it. And then we're going to practice our voting. What I'm going to propose that we do for voting is that we record our votes in the chat. And if you are on the phone, we will call out your name and you will give your vote verbally. So that way we have a nice record. Last time it kind of felt like we were doing a few things with voting, some like hand raising, some folks in the chat. And so this is just a way for us to have a single format. So votes will be recorded in the chat. And then if you are on the phone, we will call out your name and you'll give your vote verbally. We're also going to use motions and seconds just to make sure that we're clear about what we are voting on. So after we have our discussion here about the group agreements, we'll see if we have a motion to approve the group agreements, and then we'll practice our voting. Does that sound good to everybody? The folks I can see, a little thumbs up, that all makes sense. Right, great. So these 4 group agreements, the first one is listen to learn and share to advance. This is just a way of encouraging us to not just like wait for our turn to talk, but be thinking about what am I learning from the people who are sharing now, and how is what I want to say going to add and push us forward. I hope that in this space we have a lot of agreement, and so there might be feelings of like, I just want to ditto what was said. I just want to, you know, double down on what was said, and that's great. And I think we can maybe use some of our reactions that we have in this space, like hand claps, thumbs up, again, reactions in the chat. But when you do decide that you want to share, be thinking about how you're helping us advance that, that conversation, while also trying to center listening to other folks as they're sharing. Things will help us learn and grow together. The second one is take up space and give space with intention. I know I for sure am somebody who tends to talk a lot. I always have a question, like never ask for feedback because I've always got it, right? And I always have to make sure I'm taking the time to say, am I taking up this space with intention, or am I taking up space because it felt quiet, right? Am I taking up space because I have something important to share and add? Again, that sharing to advance. And then making sure that I'm also giving space. If I've noticed that somebody else hasn't shared, or someone has had their hand up and they kind of keep getting skipped, how can I help to create space for them as well and make folks feel welcomed to share what they want to share? Strive to be solution oriented. That's the third one. I think because we're doing a lot of problem solving in this space, it will, I think, get easy to just kind of point out challenges. Later on, we're going to have a little bit of a brainstorming session where I think we're going to talk almost exclusively about challenges. But I really want to encourage, both for the task force members and for our staff support, that when we're adding those things, when we're bringing things into the discussion, if we're like, we can't do that, you know, let's try to have a yes and kind of approach to that. So we can't do that. But we could maybe do this, or we could maybe do that, or we could consider this information or that information, right? Help us stay solution oriented. It can be a little jarring when we feel like it's just kind of a no and we don't know where else to go. So let's try to keep ourselves moving forward, even if we do hit some roadblocks. And then the last one, be welcoming of asking for clarification and challenging assumptions. This is just to think about, what is my degree of maybe worry or defensiveness or concern about what I'm saying. If somebody challenges what I'm saying, it might feel like, oh, we're getting into a debate now. And debate can be very good, but I need to be in a welcoming space for that. I need to welcome that challenge. I need to welcome people asking me for clarification, just as much as I need to know that other folks are open to me asking for clarification or challenging things they might be putting on the table. And so these, like I said, are my 4 go-to, but I want to pause there and see if we've got some feedback. Yes, Marianne.
I see Dinesh is here now. Can we ask him to introduce himself and go back to what he donated last to?
Oh, absolutely. Sorry, we've missed you, Dinesh.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. It's actually Danish Madura with United Way of the Columbia Willamette. I use he, him pronouns. I last donated to Soft Landings, which supports immigrants, refugees, and newcomers in the state of Montana. Good to be with you.
Thank you. Okay. So I've opened up my slide so I can make edits to this if folks have anything that they would like to add or change about the group agreements. Lisa did. And thank you, Heather, for the comment.
Just thank you, Mercedes, for writing these so that we could have something to respond to. I like all these. I especially appreciate strive to be solution oriented. Happy to make a motion when the time comes.
Thank you. If there aren't any edits or changes we would like to make, then I will open up the floor to see if we have a motion to approve.
I move that we approve the group agreements as submitted.
Do we have a second?
I'll second. Lots of
Okay,
seconds.
thank you. And so now let's get to a vote. If you, we have a motion to approve these group agreements as they are written and a second. If you support that, please write yes or approve in the chat. If we have anyone on the phone, please, let's see. I'm just kind of double checking. I don't think we had anybody on the phone. We should be able to do our votes in the chat. I'm adding my yes. And I'm just going to do a quick count. All right, that is 13 yeses. Thank you very much, everybody. We've approved our group agreements. I'm gonna go back to our slideshow. And then I'll probably take the slides down for most of the remainder of the meeting here. But this is just a preview of what we're gonna go through for the rest of our agenda. So at our first meeting, we made some edits to our charter. So we're gonna review those. As we had agreed, this is gonna be a working document. So we're not necessarily gonna like finalize that, but we wanna make sure that folks can see the contributions that were made and the changes that were made to the charter. We're then going to review our project plan. This was on our agenda for the first meeting, but we didn't get to it. We're going to review mostly the problem statement and the scope of work. It's actually a fairly long document, but we're going to have a discussion on whether or not we would want to have a subcommittee actually take on the bulk of that document to kind of get into the weeds of the different steps that we might need to cover over the course of the next year and bring back a proposal to the larger group. Then we will take a break. And then we will go into a brainstorming session with a Jamboard activity. We will end with an executive session, which you have a separate link for that. When we get to that, I'm going to read out the statement that's here, and then we'll go into that executive session, and then we'll come back to this meeting to adjourn. And if we have a little bit of extra time, I think we might hear a little bit more from Melinda. But this is the current scope of the next hour and a half, 2 hours of our meeting. Any questions about the remainder of the agenda? Yes, Mary.
Do we have something before we adjourn? Can we ask people to put in the chat what they might like to see on the next agenda at the end of our meeting?
We can certainly take that. We do have a pretty good list of things from still the first meeting that we haven't quite programmed out yet. And I think our brainstorming session will also give us some ideas for things that we need for future meetings. But we'll absolutely make sure that since we have to do the recommendations in our public meetings that we do that. We are having also an agenda set. We also have an agenda subcommittee, which is also a place that if you would like to attend those meetings, you can talk with Amy to get that on your calendar. Which is another place where you can contribute to what's going to be on our agenda. All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing now. And then Amy, I think you had the copy of our charter. Thank you very much. So we now have a link in the chat to the charter with the revisions. Let's see, can you open this? And then Amy, would you like me to share that on my screen?
I'm happy to share that with you. Hopefully you can see it pulling up now.
Thank you.
You bet. Let me know when you can see it, and you can go ahead and begin a discussion. Not coming through?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, very good. Did you want me to walk through that, Mercedes, or were you going to walk through the changes that were made?
If you could, that would be great. And that way you can also control the scroll.
Okay, you bet. So the first change that we made here was we updated this sentence here to say that our recommendations would also go to an interim committee of the Legislative Assembly with a copy to the DAS director on the following recommendation. So we just added that information there. The next place that we had comments from the group was working for the common good of state government. And I'm just going to go ahead and pull up the comments here. We had lots of discussion about if it was really for the common good of state government or if it was for the good of citizens and nonprofits. perhaps we wanted to change to healthy processes and then make that change reflected throughout the document. So I recorded that comment here, but I wanted to see if we could get a consensus from folks on what you would like to see in the document. I didn't make the change. I just captured the comments from our last meeting. Is there any thought on that? Dinesh?
Yeah, I like the sentiment. I might just suggest changing citizens to residents, and otherwise I think it's good.
Okay. I see another hand raised, but I can't see the screen here. Let me try to grab it.
Looks like Felicita.
Thank you.
Thanks. So I think I'm a little confused because based on what I'm seeing is that instead of the common good of state government, maybe it could be to the common good of Oregonians. I also am not a big fan of the word citizens. It's exclusionary. But I also feel like I'm missing something because I feel like Danesh is responding to something I don't see.
Oh, I think Danesh was talking about the so the comment that is just on the side. So yeah, there we go. Just responding to that, which was kind of the note from that. So I see Leah's recommendation in the chat with healthy processes. So for the common good of healthy processes, is that what the suggestion is? If folks have some specific language, maybe putting that in there, like what would we replace just the state government with? How would we expand that out? Marianne?
How about the people of Oregon as opposed to the citizens of Oregon?
So if you could make that a full sentence, that would be great. So work for the common good of.
Kind of like the Oregonians because it was simple.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Dolly. Another recommendation. So so that sounds like we've had at least a couple of people. So we would replace then the state government with the common good of Oregonians and healthy processes. Yes, Debbie.
I don't have a comment, but I noticed that Kristen had a comment in the chat, and she was asking if she could be reminded of what the bill said with regard to this topic.
I am pulling up the bill right now. Okay, let's see here. I am not seeing, I'm going to pull this over here so that you can see the bill. I'm not seeing where it speaks to that specific language. I mean, relating to compensation for nonprofit organizations that provide services on behalf of the state. That's in a nutshell all it really says. The rest of the bill is really descriptive on our task. I don't know if that helps or not, Kristen. Awesome. Thank
So
you.
I see a question. Does Oregonians exclude tribes? I don't know if I can answer that question. Because I think we kind of settled on citizens felt too exclusive, residents, Oregonians felt more inclusive.
I was typing in the chat. I certainly don't feel like I can speak for all tribes, nor am I in this statement. So let me just be really clear about that. I'm also not from an Oregon tribe. My tribe is from New Mexico, but there is some tribes are comfortable with first Oregonians. So I don't think it's the worst sort of compromise word. There's actually a book that the Office of Indian Education has put out that is called First Oregonians. So I think some tribes have become pretty comfortable with it. But I can't speak for, like I said, any of the Oregon tribes, let alone all of them.
Absolutely. But thank you for some of that additional context. That was really appreciated.
Do you think residents sounds better than Oregonians then?
Or perhaps it's back to people of Oregon?
I like terms like people. I think residents kind of comes back to Mercedes' comment around being exclusionary for some. Just the term, resident, non-resident, that type of thing. So, but that's just me personally. I like using words like people. There was another one that was suggested that I thought was helpful, that I'm blanking on right now.
So we have a suggestion from Helen, which is for the common good of those living in the boundaries of Oregon. The common good of all people. I like the common good of people living in Oregon. I think it's pretty clean.
Okay.
Okay.
Very
So
good.
then, yeah.
Go ahead. So then we had some comments on while striving to make recommendations that support living wages. And so let's see here, we had comments that living wages are important, but we wanted to be more expansive and have language that encompasses all of the issues to task force plans to look at. Not sure I captured that great, but hopefully you get the spirit of what the discussions were in the last meeting. Bettina, did you have some comments to add?
My hand up was more about the words of healthy processes. I was just curious about what I should imagine there. Something doesn't come really to mind behind those two words, what a healthy process would be. So.
And I think that actually is maybe speaking to this, like expanding the living wages. So I would say maybe we delete the and healthy processes. So we're working for the common good of people living in Oregon while striving to make recommendations that support living wages and I think this is the other part, right? And healthy contracting practices, healthy partnerships with government and nonprofits. I think that's kind of what we meant by healthy processes, I think, in that space. And I think it kind of fits here. Yes, Felicia did.
I like, you said partnerships, which I like, just because we know that contracting and grant making gets confused. And so I guess I'd like to see it both called out or just say partnerships, if that makes sense. Thanks, Mercedes.
So healthy partnerships between government and nonprofits for employees of nonprofits.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry to do this in real time. I know that's zero fun for the staff, but thank you, Mercedes, for working with us.
Absolutely. And then Amy, where it says contracting, if we could say contracting and grant, we're differentiating between the two. Because I think that does speak well to, we're trying to do this ultimately for the people who are doing a lot of the direct service work in our community. Marianne.
So I put in the chat that support living wages for employees and healthy contracting practices between government and nonprofits. So the living wages are for the employee, the healthy contracting practices is for the nonprofits.
Okay, so you're just kind of looking at the order of that kind of sentence.
Yes.
And then we have a call for, I think 2 people mentioned efficient process as opposed to healthy process. That probably has something to do with grammar, right? That processes aren't healthy, they're efficient.
But partnerships are. So maybe attach healthy to partnerships and efficient to either practices or processes would be my suggestion.
I noticed on the efficient that that's sort of a, not the most equitable language, because efficient and effective is a sort of a dominant culture process. I wonder if we can, make that a little bit less.
Do you have a recommendation?
I'm just thinking what would be a better word for that. But efficient sort of sounds not necessarily including, if it's efficient, it could be against employees. So let me think about it and I'll put it in the chat.
Okay, sounds good. And then I think, honestly, whatever ends up being the final of that bullet point, because I think when you scroll down, Amy, at the group purpose, we have some of the exact same comments there in the side that I think we're working through in this bullet point. So I think we should probably just copy that first bullet point into the group purpose so that we have that consistency. Because then we'll be able to be speaking both to the wages as well as to the contracting and grant procurement processes.
Looks like Ganesh has his hand up.
Thank you.
Yeah, so just sort of a general comment, the kind of direction that the language is going makes good sense to me, and not just for the sake of optics, but just in general. I think if we add something along the lines of, in service of the people of Oregon. It is about the living wages of nonprofit employees. It is about healthy practices, but to what end? And the end is that the work that government and nonprofit do together support fill in the blank, right? So something about how it's aimed at supporting the people, the issues that are being addressed by the 9 agencies that are represented here. I can play with some language and put it in the chat, but again, I think it goes a little beyond optics. We don't want this to just be about, let's make sure nonprofits get paid a lot of money. That's not the sole focus of our work.
I think that's a very good point. And I think when we get to the project plan, there is a problem statement in that I think maybe really aligns with kind of like that defining of why does it even matter, right? That nonprofits and government work well together. So yes, please draft that up and then we'll see, I think, if it fits here or if it potentially actually fits in that project planning document. Helen.
I agree with what Donish said in terms of having that vision. Just wanted to offer the word sustainable instead of efficient. So sustainable contracting and grants practices, because my first thought was non-extractive, but I think what we're really trying to get to is that, you know, nonprofits are not waiting for 12 months for reimbursements. They really are able to continue their work in partnership with the government. So I wonder if sustainable would be possible language to demonstrate, you know, it's not about someone getting more or someone getting less. It's really about how do we make sure that everything keeps running smoothly.
Sustainable. So we have some votes for sustainable in the chat as well. Okay. All right, looks good.
Mercedes, can I ask a quick question?
Mm-hmm.
I want to make sure I'm following everything, and I did miss the first meeting, but I did watch the recording. Are you, with the living wages piece, I'm getting stuck on that because like it could be argued that living wages are being provided, but we know that's not really the case, and we know like the need for thriving wages and wages that ensure people can take care of their families. So is that going to be part of the problem statement later?
Let's take a look.
And feel free to bump me to another if I just need to wait until we get to the problem statement. I'm mindful of what it means to wordsmith a multiple page document.
Yeah. So sort of. So in the problem statement, it talks about that the current practices limit wages for employees, right? So it makes it difficult for us to pay people more, even though we know they need it, deserve it. And I do know that in our first meeting, we definitely had some questions about, is it a living wage? Is it a competitive wage? You know, what is the language that we're trying to use around that? And I also want to call out, I think some of that is just a little bit big, right? That there's lots of different ways people are talking about wages. And so we don't have consistent language across the community. I see we have a couple of folks, so I'm going to ask Katrina and then Kristen to please share.
Thank you. I am driving, so apologize. I can't come on screen. And if you lose me for a second, I promise I will come back. About to hit a dead spot. But I also apologize. It wasn't in the first meeting. This, if I recall correctly, this bill was also trying to address administrative rates and essentially like the underfunding of nonprofits, both on the wage side, but also in being able to maintain effective operations or operations that don't, you know, undercut themselves. So I'd love to see some language around that. Again, either in the problem statement or in this space. I agree, living wages is definitely the priority, and I don't want an outcome to be we end up funding so much operations, but then we still end up with 5% or 10% admin rates that we're also causing an issue.
Mm-hmm.
And it's part of the reason why we're here.
Yes, absolutely. I think so. What you're speaking to, I think, is kind of buried in this language around procurement, grant and contracting practices, struggling with that language of like sustainable, efficient, effective. So I think, let's see, we are kind of into now the group purpose. And so my initial recommendation was to take that first bullet point and that our purpose as the task force will strive to make recommendations to support living wages, or actually the language that we have here, right? To make recommendations that support living wages for nonprofit employees and sustainable contracting and grant practices, healthy partnerships between government and nonprofits. So that's what our first bullet point says. But let's take Kristen's comment first.
Thank you. I just wanted to kind of put out there as a possibility. I think that one of the things that I'm hearing this group kind of wrestle with a lot is the discrepancy between the language that's in the bill itself and this need to sort of expand on what that language means. And so I'm wondering if the best way to address this is to to allow the main part of the template of our charter to utilize the language of the bill, but then to actually specifically call out somewhere in our charter the issues that we think aren't quite addressed appropriately within the bill. So we could utilize the living wage language, but then in another section where we're specifically talking about, you know, the bill is great, but it doesn't meet the full need, and here are the other needs. We could call that out, because I'm just thinking about our ultimate product is going to be looked at by lawyers and legislators, and they're going to want a recommendation that says, here's how we met all of the parameters of what was required in the bill, and here are our additional recommendations that we think are really important for you to understand and hear us about. So just putting that out there as a possibility that we could utilize the language of the bill so that we meet the actual structure and charge that we've been given, but then also be true to the fact that this is a bigger problem or a bigger issue than can be reasonably addressed in one bill to create a task force.
Mm-hmm. So, Amy, if you scroll up a little bit and just take us back to the top of the document. So that first section there, the bullet points that are listed, changes to the state procurement practices, uniform application, standard contract language, that is all copied from the bill. So that's what the bill currently says. And I think you're right that we're kind of trying to expand more on what the language says currently. You know, the top line of the bill is just related to compensation for nonprofits. So that top line doesn't even speak to living wages. That's not mentioned until into the bill, where we see that part of our charge is to see changes to state procurement practices that will support living wages for employees. So if we go into our purpose statement, which right now, again, I think just really pulls from the bill language that says, we will examine existing state grant and procurement practices to make recommendations for changes to support a living wage. That only really takes into account kind of one of the bullet points, as opposed to kind of that list that we have at the top. And then whether or not we want to use living wages or a different description of, like, we're changing compensation practices to achieve what, I think that will continue to be a working language in here, because it's not necessarily like there isn't a legal definition for a living wage, right? So I think it matters, what do we feel is going to be sufficient enough change to achieve something that creates more stability in these workforces that are really needed to complete the work that we're seeing in community. And then I see Representative Conrad has a comment in the chat. Did you want to read that out loud, or do you want someone else to?
No, I didn't need to read it out loud. I just put it in there. You guys are having a good discussion on terms, so I just wanted to put that aspect in there as well.
Okay. Around our fiduciary responsibilities to the taxpayer. Absolutely. Okay. So I think our purpose, our group purpose, does need to encompass that we're making recommendations on not just wages and not just grant and procurement, but really grants, contracting, and procurement. So I think what I want to do is I think we've got some really good language in our problem statement and our scope of work that I think could really inform that part of it, that group purpose, because I think right now it is just the language that's in the bill. And if we want more, as noted in the notes that Amy has on the side, we need to hone in a little bit more specifically on the problem and the scope, right? And I think then we will feel more comfortable with what to put in this group purpose box. So I'm going to suggest that we finish any last comments that are in this section, and then come back to the group purpose and see, do we want to just take that first bullet and put it into the group purpose box, or do we have different ideas on how to have a nice, clean, short statement once we have like those bigger statements where we'll have more, I think, more of this detail about what is the purpose of the relationships between nonprofits and government? How do we define a livable wage or sustainable practices? We can have a little bit more space because these are kind of, right, like single sentences. And I think that, as Kristen mentioned, that's part of like, we're trying to get more specific about how we will feel that we have achieved some success or that we have come to the right recommendations. And I think we need more words for that. And we might be able to find that in our project plan instead. So kind of going, are folks okay with that? Is that okay to kind of hold on this and come back when we've had a chance for more detail in a different document? Not seeing anybody unmute to jump. Okay. So further down in our document, the next comment was, I think, in addition to our responsibilities and expectations. Or no, wait, there's a comment about the chairperson, sorry.
Yes. Let's see. I don't know why that's not popping up. It's just tied to this one for some reason. Maybe it's because I resolved that.
Okay. So then the next one is just the ad about equity.
Yes. Center equity and anti-racism in our approach to improve historically harmful practices that perpetuate disenfranchisement and lack of investment in communities most underserved. We had some consultation with DOJ. Originally, we thought that we needed to be careful of that language, but it was approved as is. So if we are okay with that, we can just accept that and include it.
Okay, so we didn't end up getting any edits from DOJ that we might need to make to that?
We did not. They approved it as is.
Okay.
So I think maybe this goes back to the chairperson carry out individual assignments as assigned by the task force. Here's the comment from that one. I think members raised some concerns about consensus and majority of the vote, and that being, here we go. Oh, whoopsie. It jumped all the way down on me, my apologies. Okay. So I don't know if there's any more thought about assignments coming from the chairperson, or if we would like to leave that as is.
Oh, I remember that. Okay. Because I think we had talked about okay, I remember that. Perhaps to clarify for this one was carry out individual assignments assigned or agreed to by the task force, as opposed to the chairperson, right? So it's, we have decided we're creating this subcommittee. We have decided we need volunteers for something, as opposed to me telling people, I think was where we were trying to go with that.
I think you hit the nail on the head. Okay. So we'll just change that language there. And this language, like I said, was approved here on the center equity piece. So we'll just keep moving in the document. This next piece is under the decision-making process. we had agreed that voting must take place during the public meeting with voting members casting their votes in the task force virtual meeting space or by phone call into the virtual meeting space. So just to clarify that, how we were accepting votes.
And we talked about that during our announcements. That works.
We did. I think that's pretty straightforward. Let's keep moving to the next comments. Here was really just about switching out that language that we did up above to include the people of Oregon as opposed to the common good of state government. So I'll just make this document reflect that change throughout. The next section then is on convening information for our ad hoc meetings and subgroups. This was the first bullet. We had some comments about the chair will authorize or dissolve ad hoc subgroups. And again, I think it was the consensus of, is that really the chair's responsibility or is it the task force, the agreed upon by the task force language that we used up above?
Yeah, and I think we're using the task force will authorize or dissolve ad hoc groups by a majority vote.
Okay, very good. We made some changes here on the frequency of meetings that the agenda setting meetings will occur monthly with the chair, co-chair, and members of the agenda setting subgroup, since we established that in our last meeting. So that language is straightforward, unless you'd like to see any changes there. Okay. For the agenda, members of the task force can make their requests known during the call for next agenda items, which will be a standing topic for each regular meeting session. We can also accept those by email. We took out the prior language that said those needed to be communicated to the chair at least 7 days in advance of the meeting date. And I will add by email to the board administrator. Oops. And I see
yes,
Felicity's hand. Mm-hmm.
So I just want to make sure that if I'm reading this correctly, that in practice at each of these monthly meetings, we would have an agenda item that is future agenda items, and we would be able to share what we would like. And also at the same time, there are regular agenda item meetings where this is going more in depth. Am I understanding correctly? Awesome. Thank you.
And the third option, which is you could also just email Amy with an agenda item idea, and then that'll make it into our agenda planning meetings.
Thank you.
Marian?
When we were in the agenda setting, didn't we change that from 7 days before to something shorter?
I think we're eliminating that because it was it was saying like you could send me a message about things you would like on the agenda, but that then violates our new public meetings law. So the only way for us to collect ideas for agendas are at the meeting or at the agenda planning meeting or in an email directly to Amy that will then be connected with the agenda planning meeting. So no more needing to talk amongst each other, I guess, is the answer, outside of the meetings. Does that make sense, Marian? Or were you thinking about?
Right, but the at least 7 days before the actual date, I thought we had changed that to like 24 hours or 36 hours or something like that.
Oh, I think that was for public comment. We said that people could submit public comment 24 hours before the next meeting. And then it'll be posted for review for that meeting.
You are correct.
Okay. If there's no more comments on that section, we'll keep moving then to the amendment to the charter. We changed this language to make it a living document that could be altered up until the final task force recommendations are made. Changes can be proposed to the chair by any task force member. I think the rest of it's straightforward. Any other comments on that one? Okay. And
I think that's good. So we have
concludes
our, thank you very much, Amy. So that leaves us with our group purpose that we can still come back to and make some changes to. But for now, we'll call those edits good. Okay. So the next thing we're going to get into is the project plan. And this is where we have our problem statement and our scope of work. It's going to be some of the same language. So I think it's a good opportunity to kind of play with some of that language a little bit. And then after that, we'll take a break and then we'll come back for our big brainstorming session. Amy, are you able to share the project plan document and or pull it up on our screen?
You bet. I'm working on it right now.
Okay, I see the link in the chat. Thank you so much.
Okay. Please let me
do
know
we
when
want
you
to
can see. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Yeah, we can see the document up on the screen, but I was wondering if maybe you and or Debbie wanted to start with, because I know this is something that was initially drafted by DAS. So if you wanted to start with kind of the purpose and the function of this document so we can all kind of center around that.
Amy, would you like me to take that one?
That would be great. Thank you, Debbie.
Okay. So the purpose of the project plan, what we did is we sort of took a standard template that we use in our offices for developing a project plan, and we populated it with the information we knew of prior to convening our first task force meeting. The purpose is to really lay out what the scope of our work is, and then to lay out some timelines. And to me, most importantly, what the goals are of our work, and then how will we measure if we are on track to meet our goals. So some of the information here is simply a proposal for this group to consider, or some, we very much expect this to be another document that we work on together and make sure that it's meeting the needs of the entire task force. Amy, do you have anything more to add?
No, you did a great job. Thank you, Debbie.
Awesome. So what I'd like to propose is, if you're looking at the document on your computer, you can see that it is about 6 pages long. There's these big pieces on top that are our problem statement and our scope of work. Then it goes into goals and measurements, additional resources, some implementation notes, reports and deliverables, schedule, some communication, right? So there's lots of great things in here, I think, to help us stay on task. I think what I think would be helpful is if we were to together agree on the problem statement and the scope of work, so we all have a sense of this document is pointed in the right direction. And then see if we actually have maybe some members of our group who would be interested in forming a subcommittee, which we would vote to approve that, to get into some of those more detailed steps as a way to help guide us. And then this would end up becoming something we could use in our agenda planning meetings. We can kind of check back on in future meetings to see, are we getting the pieces that we need to move forward?
So are you asking for volunteers right now?
First, I'm asking if that sounds comfortable to say that we're going to together in this meeting work on the problem statement and the scope of work, and then pitch it to a subcommittee to complete the rest of the document to then bring back to a future meeting for all of us to review.
I support that. It's really painful to walk through a document with this many people. I find it really difficult.
Right, and as you, that's why I was like, all the sections in here, this is great stuff for us to keep in mind, but yeah, it's hard to do that in a big group. See, I saw a couple of chats come in, a little thumbs up. Can we work on deliverables and then back into what subgroups and facts we will need? So the facts that we will need and the potential subgroups, I'm hoping will come out in our brainstorming session next. So that'll be great information for whatever subcommittee group takes this on, because we're going to basically go through each of the bulleted items, like on wages. What information do we need from departments? What information can we use from an external expert to help us figure out how we get better wages, wage allowances, wage structures, and contracts? Then we'll go to the uniform application, ask the same question. What do we need from the state departments? What do we need externally? And start kind of building that list. I think that will help to inform. There's like a whole section here about resources, right? So like that'll help to inform what additional resources might we want to bring into this space. So that's why I feel like if we can at least all center around, we're solving the same problem and we're playing in the same sandbox, then we can kind of let people who are more process minded, who really like to think about steps, help us build out the rest of this document. So I'm not hearing any objections, mostly just clarification. So I think we're okay to go forward with this process. So the problem statement. So, and this, I think, Amy, please correct me if I'm wrong. This was drafted by staff within DAS. This isn't necessarily like pulling the bill language. This one's a little bit more expansive. Is that right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. So it's currently drafted to say the state of Oregon, as an enterprise, lacks standardized grant and contracting procedures related to working with nonprofit organizations. The process for grants and contracting with the state is providing client services varies from agency to agency. It is difficult for grant and contract applicants to navigate the process due to the variations and complexities. The state's existing grant and public procurement practices also limit the wages of employees of nonprofit organizations. So I think this is where I would love to kind of start with. I think this is a good start for our problem statement, right? Because this is definitely what we're talking about. Different rules. I mean, even within agencies, different funding sources have different rules. Sometimes grants are treated like true grants where you get funds up front and you report back in on your spending and your outcomes. And sometimes grants are treated like contracts and you have to submit receipts to get reimbursed. And it actually lasts a couple of years. So knowing what those things are, I think, is important. But I also think this is the place where, Danesh, you had mentioned, why is it even important for nonprofits and the government to work well together? Like, what are we losing by not having those good practices together? So I know I asked you to kind of think about that before we got here. So I'm going to pitch back to you and see, do you have anything else you'd like to share on what you might want to see either in the problem statement or the scope of work, really centering why it's important for us to have these good relationships?
Sure, and I'm, processing out loud here, so this is not watertight, foolproof language, but, at the end of the day, in my mind, government outsources a number of functions to nonprofits. It asks nonprofits to work in partnership with government to do something on behalf of the people of Oregon. At the end of the day, that's what matters, is whether or not the various agencies that are charged with health, education, behavioral services, any number of issues, are able to deliver on that charge. And nonprofits need to work in tandem with government to make sure that that happens. So I think the spirit of that needs to come through a little bit in our problem statement. So in order to do that, we have to make sure that nonprofits are able to sustain themselves. And that includes, but is not limited to, living wages, right? I think living wage is important, but again, it goes beyond that. It also means that the contracting and granting process has to be relatively efficient, and that we're making demonstrable progress to improve it over a period of time, and that there's a commitment to kind of go back to that and not get stuck trying to make things perfect on day one, but being committed to an ongoing effort to improve over time. Because we live in a dynamic state, things are going to change. It's more that commitment to continuing to improve that's important. So those pieces jump out to me when I think about it. And so where I see in this current problem statement, standardizing is potentially important, but it doesn't rise real high for me. You can have something that's standardized that's really terrible, right? It'd be better to have something that's dynamic, that's nimble, that can be adjusted in real time based on changing reality, which isn't to say we should have stuff that's, completely different all the time, but that emphasis doesn't quite work for me. So at the end of the day, make sure that we're delivering for people in Oregon. Make sure we're committed to ongoing improvement, not just one-time improvement. And, make sure that it's sustainable for all parties concerned. And I can free associate for hours. So, hopefully that just gets the ball rolling.
Thank you. Bettina.
Yeah, a lot of what Dinesh said is also on my mind. And when I think of partnership, I also think about building on our strengths, and what our current system has is not a high level of trust, or using quality systems that partners already use. So there's sort of duplication in checking, rather than really using our quality processes across the state and nonprofits to deliver the best way, and have that dynamic part, but also not. Sometimes it feels like we are micromanaged rather than we're seen as a real true partner with quality systems, and we rely on each other's quality systems and we don't duplicate. That's a big thing on my mind. And then it does not feel like a true partnership that is flexible, that really goes in tandem, and we support each other both ways in terms of educating about what we do. And not with a trust me, but really with the partnership mentality that we're here to do the best together, and we bring strengths. And yes, the state gives the money, but it's invested on behalf of Oregonians in quality organizations that the state contracts with.
Okay, and then I also see some language in the chat around an ecosystem of government and non-government partners working collaboratively, equitably, creatively to meet the needs of all people. So I'm going to throw something in the chat. Here's my initial recommendation, kind of pulling both those pieces of language. Hold on. Okay. Okay, so this would be my recommendation for essentially the first two sentences, right? One saying that for government initiatives and investments to succeed in improving the lives of people in Oregon, nonprofit organizations are a key partner to deliver and implement the work. And then pulling the language that was suggested in the chat, a sustainable and consistent ecosystem of government and community-based nonprofit partners working collaboratively, equitably, creatively to meet the needs of all people, right? So like that's who we are. We have to do this work together. I think I might add to the end of that sentence. Just saying like that it is critical, right? Thank you, Leah. I see you are my grammar friend. I really appreciate that. So we kind of make that statement, right? That we need to be able to work together to achieve all of these things. That there is, what is the kind of old school nonprofit moniker, right? Like nonprofits do what governments can't and what the market won't, right? So we are filling in that space to take care of our community. So we start our problem statement with that. Then we move into that the state of Oregon lacks the standardizing grant and contracting procedures related to working with nonprofits, right? So we know we need to work together. We know we need to do this work together. And we also know that we lack having that infrastructure in place, that things are just a little bit too inconsistent across different agencies, and that it's difficult for applicants to navigate that in order to achieve those ends. And so the state's existing granting and public procurement practices are also limiting the wages of employees. And I think that's where we can also get more specific, jumping back to that living wage language, right? What do we actually want to say about how these existing practices impact our ability to deliver work? So I think that last sentence needs a little bit of update based on what we've heard so far, right? Because it's the inconsistency, the delays in payment, the kind of constant restart of too many processes that results in stagnant wages, in limitation of organizations' ability to grow, to meet ongoing needs in their community, right? Like things like that. So any other ideas for how we want to adjust additional language here?
I think inconsistency and lack of standardization, again, is definitely a piece of the puzzle. But what also concerns me is that, you know, we could agree, and this would be a huge accomplishment by itself, we could agree on a standardized approach to doing contracting and granting, you know, in 2023, and then 2024, we'll be throwing some curveballs and unexpected twists and turns. And to what extent do we have a mechanism in place to adapt and be nimble? So again, I think part of the problem is thinking we can make a one-time fix and not taking into account the fact that the state's needs will always be changing. So what do we have in place that can kind of zig and zag when it's required? So consistency, good. We should move in that direction, but we should not assume that we can fix this once and be done.
Mm-hmm. Lisa.
Thanks, Mercedes. I'm mindful that, you know, so much of what you mentioned, the indirect rates, the late payments, those are all critical pieces to the puzzle, as well as increasing contracts for inflation and more so. Being mindful of what is being asked of nonprofits in these agreements, where they're being asked to do more with less resources. So I just want to make sure that we capture that, because while I will celebrate if we address indirect rates and we address late payments, like in order to increase wages, like that's not sufficient. Thank you.
Katrina.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, recognizing that the audience for the outcomes of this is legislators, lobbyists and lawmakers, I do want to mention some, and sorry, I'm processing this out loud. It just came up as I was talking, as I was thinking about it, but something around the fits and starts and allocation process of the legislative budgeting sort of swirl that happens each legislative session. You know, there's some dollars that are tied to CSL, some dollars that are tied to one-time general funds, some dollars that are tied to income. And I feel like the other thing that sort of gets us caught in these weird webs of delays has a lot to do with funding structures that get designed and voted on in the legislature, or that end up getting amended or allocated to in the legislature. So there's some problem there that I'd love to sort of define in the problem statement as well, just recognizing that, you know, legislators have a role to play too. And, you know, we end up sometimes, you know, I'm thinking specifically, and I'm not trying to bring what's happening in 2100 in here, but I'm thinking specifically about, you know, there at one point there was a legislative designation that anti-poverty funding went to a certain group of organizations with this certain structure for this specific purpose, and any money that sort of defined that criteria ended up getting put into that pot. So it ended up with CSL, with general fund, with EHA, with SHEP, with different kinds of funding structures. But what it did is it ensured some sort of funding mechanism for nonprofits on an ongoing basis. And so having some sort of either mechanism, or I don't know what word I'm looking for, like structure that that legislators can continually come back to fund this continual work or make agreements on a time-oriented basis. I know I'm thinking to solutions here, but I hope folks understand what I'm trying to say, that there is a role for the legislature to play, and I'd love to call that out in the problem statement.
I think that's very well said, right? Because I think one of the things we're going to hear when we start getting into how to have a unified application process is like, well, the bill said, right? And that's the legislator's action. Or
Exactly.
We want to be able,
or statute
yeah, we want to be
said.
able to, exactly, right? And so like, that's why I have to have 16 different processes for my 16 different funding sources, because that's how it was given to me by the legislature, right? And so I think you're definitely hitting on that early piece that can impact an agency's ability to have standard practices even when they really want them.
And at the end of the day, to Danish's point, in terms of delivering services to people, we end up in these fits and starts, or, you know, destructing programs instead of constructing programs because of a lack of clarity, or we didn't get the money in time, or what may have you, as a result of what happened in the legislature, not necessarily the administrative processes after something had been voted on.
Mm-hmm.
And so it affects our ability to support people. And I see Stephanie Stevens comment in here about sometimes federal. That's true too. Big time. Yay, Treasury.
Very true. Okay. So I have a new one based on that so far. So this is looking at kind of the last statement. So I'm kind of sandwiching a little bit. Like we're starting with like a new 2 sentences to clarify why this work is important. We're acknowledging that the current practices are, you know, inconsistent, difficult to navigate. and then getting to that last sentence. So the state's existing, and then grant. So then I edited from there. So the state's existing granting, contracting, and procurement practices perpetuate stagnant wages, slow delivery of services, or disruption in achieving intended outcomes, limit organizations' ability to grow and adapt to changing need in the communities we serve. I'm sure there's some grammar errors there, but I was trying to capture if those are kind of the buckets of things, right? So like the wages is definitely one, but it's also generally slowing our ability to even do the work. When I think like summer programs last year was a great example. I think it was up until the end of May, we were not sure if the legislature might want to fund summer programs. And so we were trying not to lay off staff who might actually end up working in those programs until we finally heard we're definitely not funding it, right? And then we let all those people go, even though we definitely want folks continuing to do work with youth in our communities. And thank you for that comment there, Representative Conrad, around that relationship with the legislature and trying to meet those needs as well. Okay, so how does that last statement land? Is that covering this is kind of changing it to like stagnant wages and still letting us kind of define what we mean by livable wages later? Or do we want to say more about wages than kind of what's drafted there? Our slow delivery of services or disruption of achieving outcomes, and limits on organizations' ability to grow and adapt in their existing communities, right? Like, I wish I could provide A, B, or C service, but I'm only funded to provide Y service. A couple of thumbs.
I still feel like we're not specific enough around the relationship between legislators and this process. So maybe it would be the state's existing, gosh, I can't think of the word. Allocation, funding, granting, contracting, and procurement practices, because the granting, contracting, and procurement practices normally happens at the agency level, not necessarily at the legislator level, unless you get a direct allocation. So, I want to say something about the allocation part that comes from the legislature, legislative allocations, the oh Lord, I lost it already. The state's existing legislative allocation process, practices, granting, contracting, and agency granting, contracting, and procurement practices perpetuate stagnant wages. Could we say something like that?
Okay. I think that makes sense, because that's also the struggle with like the biennial budget, right? That like you can't really make longer term commitments that might actually achieve the outcomes that folks are looking for. Flagging that there are the rules look different for grants versus contracts. I sure hope so, because sometimes it feels like they're interchangeable language. I really hope that in this process we'll discover that they are supposed to be different. And I missed a comment. Thank you, Leah, for some adjustments there to the language. Felicita, around the financial stability, I think that's what I kind of meant by their ability to grow, but would you think that we need to call out financial stability specifically in that line?
No, I can let it go. Thank you, Mercedes. Appreciate it.
Okay, and then a couple more comments. Inconsistencies are time consuming for the nonprofits. We have limited bandwidth to apply for those things. Yeah, so, and I think that kind of goes back a little bit to Representative Conrad's comments in the chat as well, that if the process is really complicated, you might actually get fewer applicants for work, which then kind of limits the reach and vibrancy of the investment that you're making, while too many applicants might mean we're dividing the pie up too small and we're also still not achieving, right? So where do we find that balance? Let's see. A little call out about where DOJ fits into all this. I think we'll get into that more. Okay. So how are folks feeling about the problem statement now? A couple of thumbs up. Okay, lots of thumbs up. Nice. So why don't we go ahead and just kind of take that. So now what we have as our problem statement is the reason that this relationship is important to achieving these goals, the issue that we're seeing across the agencies, and how those inconsistencies are perpetuating a host of complications for all of us working together to really, at the end of the day, meet the needs of the communities that we are serving. So now getting into our scope of work. Okay, so the scope of the project includes assembling a work group comprised of state agencies and nonprofits to examine existing state grant and contracting procedures, work together to create standard recommendations that develop recommended changes to existing procedures that support living wages for nonprofits. That might be where we want to add a little bit as well. And then submit a report in the manner provided that may include recommendations for legislation to an interim committee of the Legislative Assembly related to grant making and public procurement, with a copy to the governor and the department no later than September 2024. Okay, so I would think that our last bullet item and our first bullet item are probably good. But maybe we want a little bit more in that second bullet item. This is the one where I think could actually really contribute to our group purpose back in that other box. Okay, another comment from Danesh. Okay.
Yeah, that comment was more in relationship to the problem statement. So I know we're a couple minutes beyond that, but.
No, I mean, I think if there's something missing there, like we want to feel good about that. And I think that that's even one of, if I go back to our set of bulleted items for what we're supposed to do, one of them was a mechanism for ongoing review and evaluation of grant making and procurement processes, right? That's like the last one.
There you go.
Yeah. So I think that to me makes sense in that second bullet, expanding that out, right? Like we are going to work together to create recommendations. Yeah. for, yeah. So work together to create our recommendations and have a mechanism for ongoing review. But I know we want to do more than livable wages here, or living wages, and we may even want to play with that word. Continuous improvement, cost of living. Yeah, so we've had a little bit of debate about living wages. I heard someone say thriving wages. I heard someone say competitive wages. I think we have to agree on a word on and what we want to put in here, and then we can update the other documents to be using the same language as well. Because I think in the bill language it just says compensation, and I think it might actually say livable wages or living wages. Let me take a quick look. Yeah, living wages. So part of this is, what do we mean by living wages? I will say for me, I constantly look at what it costs to afford housing. It's often referred to as like a housing wage, but that's when I'm talking about living wages, if it aligns with people being able to afford homes, that feels aligned. If it doesn't, I'm not sure what it means. But let's take some other comments. Heather.
This is such an issue because I'm in workforce development. So I don't think we're going to come up with the perfect word. I'm going to start with that. But the other thing is the wage that you need in order to be able to thrive or to survive depends on your family structure, your housing, your needs. And so we actually use something called a prosperity planner. So if you have children and this and that, and so there are different expenses. So it's really customized. There isn't a single wage that's going to be, so I think it's a little problematic to come up with the perfect word to describe the wages because everybody needs something different based on their life. So that's not helpful in that I don't have a magic word for it, but whatever we come up with is going to be difficult to define, and there will never be a magic word. Just having done this for 25 years in Oregon, there's no magic word. So
I think that's a good point, because I think there's two ways to look at this, right? Like, as an employer, what is a sufficient wage and how do I determine that per position? And then there's me as a human being trying to live in the world, and what do I need to be sufficient, right? So there's almost kind of two ways to look at that. Let's see. Bettina.
Yeah, I was also looking at the livable wages, and I really, as partnership, I think it seems like a low target. If we pay our clinicians a livable wage, but they could get twice as much working for the county, I don't think we're looking at sustainability. Because we're not competitive. So I think it's sort of the livable wage and the family wage is sort of my minimum, but we have to take into account what jobs people are doing. And as nonprofits, we have such a range of staff that we employ that I think livable wage would not really make it a sustainable partnership, because we could be saying that nonprofits have to pay a livable wage when the people we employ, have master's degrees and could, earn something much different in the school districts or at counties. And so I think it's livable and competitive. And how do we merge that? Because I think competitive also doesn't say it all, but the partnership, I think, would describe it in more than one aspect of what the wage should be.
Absolutely.
Maybe comparative or something.
Yeah. I see competitive showing up in the chat as well. Felisa, do you want to jump in?
Thanks. I feel like I think what everyone has said is spot on, and I don't know that I don't think there's a magic word, and I'm not familiar with Alice, but I look forward to learning. So thanks to people who are putting that in the chat. I'm curious about the state of Oregon's values around pay, because I think one of the things that is constantly coming up in the conversations that we've had prior to developing this bill is that the values of how the state of Oregon pays their team members and what nonprofit staffers are getting paid with state contracts. I just feel like maybe there's an opportunity here to bring in the state of Oregon's values around pay and make sure that that's being extended to nonprofit contracting. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I think somebody else said it, right? Like we are training incredible direct service workers to go work in administration in their local government, right? Because that's where they can get paid better. Or for governments that have direct service providers, case manager at the county is making sometimes twice as much as a case manager in a subcontracted contract with that same county, right? So I think that definitely speaks to where there is value in having a stable competitive wage versus where it feels like a bit of a race to the bottom, trying to pay as little as possible for as much as possible. It looks like I'm sorry, I need to clear my throat. It looks like we're landing a little bit on competitive wages. I wonder, maybe one of our staff folks can help. Do we have to keep living wages in here because it's in the bill? Or can we just, if we feel like we want to be talking about competitive wages, what makes these jobs good jobs for people to be in? Can we do that? Or do we need to also, do we need to say like livable and, right? So we hold on to the bill language.
I can take a stab at an answer. I don't know that it's, the end all be all, but what I think is because we haven't defined the difference between living and competitive, let me say it a different way. Perhaps if we define what living is and what competitive is, we would be safe if we were striving for something that was maybe more than what the bill asked us for, but I don't think we can strive for something less than.
Well said. Okay. Kristen?
I like what you just said. I think that probably the safest course of action is to utilize the language that is in the bill. But then I agree completely that we should call out that there is a need for a definition of what a living wage is, and that it needs to include things like competitive wage and information related to the area in which we're talking about, because a living or a competitive wage is going to be very different in, say, the Klamath Falls area versus the Portland area. So I think that is something that is really important for the legislature to understand, is something that they're going to need to dig their teeth into. So I think if we utilize the bill language, but then call out the fact that there is this gap and discrepancy, and provide them with a recommendation on how to actually define that, that's probably the most complete course of action that we could take.
Well said. And I think we have also some comments in the chat there, right? Like the competitive wages is from the employer's perspective, which is going to vary quite a bit across the state. And the livable wages, the financial stability for the person in the job is also going to vary, but it's going to be even more compounded by where they live, how big their family is, what kind of standard of living they're striving for, and things like that. So they're both going to be very varied geographically. And I think what we're trying to say in this bullet point is, I do like the idea of like, what are the jobs that we're competing with? Like, we know a lot of our staff are leaving for certain types of roles, and we want to encourage really this field, this whole sector, to be something that is worth people being in for a long time. I think we have workforce shortages in just about every corner of the work that we are doing, right? So we are competing for folks who, you know, the range is huge. The need in employment is all over the place. What makes somebody not just want to, but be able to be a childcare provider for 5 to 10 years, right? As opposed to 1 or 2 years. So I think the definitions of these things, I think like the recommendation, for example, around comparing it to government wage scales, to me feels like that almost lives in a recommendation, right? Because that's when we will be kind of putting that into action. So what I'm going to suggest is on this bullet point is that we say we work together to create standard requirements and develop recommendations to change existing procedures to support livable and competitive wages. And we can further define that when we make those recommendations, right? We can say like, I mean, I think we could even like list a floor or say you need to have some sort of floor, some sort of regional allocation that is, you know, I think we can get into that definition area when we get into those recommendations. So we have livable and competitive wages for nonprofit employees, and a mechanism for ongoing review and evaluation. Heather.
I was just thinking, one of the things that I'm a little confused about the language that we're identifying and looking at putting in here is that's like saying we're going to dictate what nonprofits need to pay. And I'm a little confused by that because, I mean, we can't really do that, right? I mean, it's more about flexibility in the funds that we get from our funder, the state, and how much we're allowed to use for staffing and how much we're allowed to use for different things. And that's where I see this helping us be able to pay more living wages. I don't know of a nonprofit that doesn't want to pay people what they're worth. It's just the funding that we get has so many limitations on it. Like, I mean, I get funding all the time from Higher Education Coordinating Council that says you can only take 6% indirect and you can only use 5% for staffing. Well, human beings do this work. So help me understand why you think you know better than I do about how to implement. So I guess I'm a little confused about kind of parsing out this language for this when I think it's more about flexibility and how much we can use of the funding that we get through the state for staffing. Does that make sense? Like I'm
Absolutely
just confused. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying is like the kind of target of to whom are these recommendations going? We have to be clear that these recommendations are about the contract limitations and changing the contract limitations. Because as we just said, what is the livable and competitive wage in your region, right, is going to be different. So it's not necessarily the, you know, we have the minimum wage that's set for everybody, and then you kind of figure out where these jobs fall from that pay scale to whatever. So
because we're a funder as well, so we get funding, but we also contract out. And so I've had concerns about how much some of our providers pay. So there I get to say, because I'm the funder, right? So
I think instead of procedures, then we want to say changes to existing contract limitations. And maybe I saw
flexibility or something. Yeah.
Yeah. Contract limitations. We can delete procedures that support flexibility to achieve. Okay. So I want to take us to a break in a minute, but I want to make sure that we feel done with this section. So does anyone else have any additional edits that they want to make? Okay. Is the chair allowed to make a motion? Do I need somebody else to do it? Because I want to call the question now about if we want to create a subcommittee to work through the rest of this document.
I would be happy to make a motion because you can't. I would like to make that motion.
Representative Conrad. Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Representative Conrad, discussion?
Nope, I'm going back. I tried to raise my hand before the motion, so I can hold off while you have that discussion. I just wanted to add a potential word for this before the motion, if that's all right. Let me know what you like.
Yeah, please do.
Where you have contract limitations, do you want the word terms in there? Because some of the terms of the contract, when it comes to auditing, when it comes to various other things, I think we want those consolidated. So if we can get down to fewer audits, so there's consistency. So to broaden this out, I would suggest adding the word terms in there as well. Thank you.
Okay. I think that is fine. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so now we have a motion and a second to create a subcommittee to review the rest of this document. If you are in support, please write in the chat, yes. I think we had a couple of people. Did we have somebody who ended up going on the phone that we need to call out? I'm not seeing it. Oh, Katrina went on the phone. Do we need a voice vote for Katrina? Or no, you're in the chat. What am I saying? Never mind.
Yeah, just put it in the chat. Thanks, Mercedes.
All right, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I only see 6 yes votes. Oh, there we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 12, 13. Okay. So we now have a subcommittee that will convene to address this. If you are interested and available in volunteering for that subcommittee, please put that in the chat or send an email to Amy. And then we're going to go ahead now and we're going to break for, I guess, 12 minutes because I want it to be a nice round number. So we'll come back at 11:05. Okay, welcome back, everybody. So we're going to spend the next about 35 minutes on a Jamboard activity. So in the chat, you should already see the Jamboard link. It's also, I just sent it to just this whole email list. So if it's not in your email, you should be able to see it in the chat and vice versa. I am going to share my screen so that we're all looking at the Jamboard together. And we're going to go through, there's 6 different pages on this, and we're going to go through them together. But if you also have like a burning thing that you want to put down and you want to jump ahead, feel free. This is a brainstorming activity, right? One note, up at the top, there's this thing that says clear frame. Don't press that button. You'll erase everybody's sticky notes and the whole sheet. So don't press that button. For folks who haven't used Jamboard before, we're mostly going to use this little sticky note right here. So when you click on this little sticky note, it'll pop up. What I'm going to ask is that, one, you can pick pretty much whatever color you want, but I'm going to ask that you use the green sticky note if you have less of a question, more of a recommendation you want to put on the table. So it's something you've already thought about, it's something maybe you've already heard about, and you just kind of want to put it out there as a possibility of something for us to discuss. I ask you to put that one in green. All other comments, feel free to use whatever color you want. I've started this first one with an example of like my question to both state departments, but also something that I might want to ask an external expert is, do different forms of payment result in different achievable outcomes for wages and employment stability? So a lot of us have seen kind of the line item budget, right, where you submit, this is how much I'm paying in wages, rent, client services, et cetera, et cetera. And then we also have some grants and contracts that are built on an amount of money per household you're going to serve over a course of time. We have value-based payment that expects like a host of multiple services, not just a single service being provided. So my question is just like, do different forms of payment result in different structures, right? Is this really something that's stuck because of the type of funding agreements that we have? And I'm just wondering from the departments, their perspective on like, we get a lot of complaints about line item budgeting and a lot fewer complaints about value-based payment, right? Like, what do you see in your practices? So this first one right here is about wages. There's 6 slides on this sheet, and the slides all align with the 6 bullet points that were on our charter. So the first one is about changes to state procurement practices. The next one is about a uniform application procedure for grants. Then we have standard contracting language that permits flexibility in contract terms and multi-year contracts. So we also know that grants and contracts should be treated differently. And so we've got one that's just about kind of our, one that's kind of about our grants, one that's about contracts. Then we have around reporting requirements, right? We know this is that additional admin burden is also something that we're thinking about. How do we make sure that we're giving good information? On this one, I tend to think about, I think some of the problems we have with our budgeting is it's like the only measure of accountability. Like we're not paying for outcomes, we're paying for tasks, and then wondering why we're not getting all the outcomes we want. And all of our audits are about tasks and where the dollars went, and less so on the impact it has on our community. So how do we shift some of that thinking and move ourselves further into a space where we're reporting on the right stuff, right? The stuff that we really want to see. We have payment models that prioritize full cost recovery. We know we have a lot of contracts and a lot of grants that are underfunding the work. So what is a payment model that gets us closer to this? What questions do we have for the state or external experts? And then lastly, a mechanism for ongoing review and evaluation of these kind of processes, right? This is where I might put a little green sticky note. More of a recommendation is like an Office of Nonprofit Partnership and Office of Nonprofit Liaison, right? That is specifically focused on this ongoing body of work. So that's what we're doing there. I see, all right, people are already putting stuff in, yay. So, so we're gonna go ahead and start with this one. I'll, like I said, if you want to jump ahead, you can, but I am going to move through these every few minutes because I might move things around or adjust things as we go. So on this first one, if you're having any trouble writing in the Jamboard, please feel free to put something in the chat and I can copy it onto a sticky note for you. But for this first one, we're asking in order to make changes to our procurement practices to support living wages, what do we need to know from our state departments? What external info would we like to bring into this space? And use the green sticky note if you have a recommendation. So. This looks like a duplicate. So the person who put this in, is it okay if I delete one?
There's a question in the chat.
SME, I don't know what that means.
Subject matter expert.
Oh, yes, of course. I think especially what I would love to see is if you see a question here that you think that you know you're going to be able to answer, add yourself a little sticky note, right? Like I could do something like this and say, you know, my department XCO has a policy on this, right? And then maybe I make it a little bit smaller and I just tag it right there. So now I know we can come back to those folks and be like, all right, so we know department, whatever has some recommendations to help answer that question. Oh, that's a good question. Do we need to sign our sticky notes? Look to our staff and ask, do we need to be able to attribute each sticky note?
Yes, please. That would be the perfect scenario. Let's go ahead and add our names to them, and then it's recorded in our meeting recording for our minutes. Thank you so much.
Okay. I might have to put my initials, which they are literally me. There is a word count limit on the sticky note. So please put your name or at least your initials. Okay, now I'm going to move us to the second page. So you haven't jumped into this one yet. Same sort of thing. Use the green sticky notes if you've got a recommendation, other sticky notes for questions you have about how to create more uniform application procedures. That's my question. If any state departments know the answer to this question, I would love little sticky note comments about like, yes, I did move to the next page. About like why, you know, program A in a department will ask for like your proof of insurance, and then program B in the same department will also ask for your proof of insurance. Like, why are those not shared systems? You're still seeing the first page?
Yeah.
How weird. Okay.
I think we just have to forward error at the top.
But I'm wondering why the presenting isn't showing the next page.
I can see the
It now
second
is.
page.
It now is.
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay. Maybe we're just a little delayed. Okay. Yes, our technology isn't smart enough. We're too quick. Hey, Caitlin, I'm going to add yours from OYA. Communication between and program. That's good to know. Looks like we could have a whole agenda topic here about sharing information. I love all the activity around that one. I saw a hand. Where'd it go? Dolly.
I am a staff person, so I want to make sure it's okay for me to ask a question / make a comment before I do so.
Yes, please.
Okay. One thing that I think needs to be said out loud and would address a lot of the problems that I'm seeing pop up here is that the state doesn't currently have a relationship management database of some kind, customer relation, something software that would allow state agencies to talk to each other. And within the Oregon Health Authority, we've looked at this, but the problem is it's truly a IT item that the state has to purchase and then give all other state agencies access to. I think if we had something like that, some of these document questions and making sure like we're tracking and already have that information might be resolved, but we don't currently have technology that could support that.
That's great. I think if that, yeah, that's kind of the sense I was getting from the other sticky notes, right? Like someone wrote in here, an enterprise grant management system, you know, limitations of communication between procurement and programs. So I think pointing out that there's also a potential technological solution that is just large scale, I think is worth a sticky note as well. Like I said, I feel like this is going to turn into an agenda item, which is how much we're seeing cluster around that one topic. So that's great. How do I? Uh-oh. I don't know how to make this go away, this little bar go away. So I can move to the next one. Okay. Oh, there we go. All right. Let's see. This is another. Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to move that one. Sorry. I was just trying to move the green one.
Geez, Mercedes,
Now
why are you trying to move my stuff off the board? No, I'm just kidding.
I'm sorry. Okay, moving on to the next one. Standard contracting language that permits flexibility in contract terms and conditions and multi-year contract terms. So what are our questions here? Somebody had written something also about like DAS and DOJ. I wonder if that question also kind of lives here. Because if all things kind of filter into a single place where we're trying to have some recommendations, I wonder. Oh, Debbie, these are all great questions. When does DAS do it for agencies and when do they not? Yeah, that's information that would be interesting to know. And that DAS and DOJ don't necessarily review the same agreements or for the same reasons. Very interesting.
Yeah. Maybe, do you want me to put like something on the external info needed, like a sticky note that says presentation by agencies and DOJ about that stuff?
Yeah, I think that would be good.
Yes, yes, yes. It's such a black box to a lot of us. I know it's important. That I know for sure. We know that. But what happens is kind of like, huh? I don't know.
I totally agree. We just hear DAS won't do something, or DOJ won't approve something, or
I do wonder, so I put it in here about like, can the contracts ever be more than 12 or 24 months long? Because is that like a biennium limitation? I mean, I kind of think maybe, but also I know that like the CCOs get 5-year contracts. Like, why doesn't anybody else get a 5-year contract? Who gets to decide when something lives beyond the biennium?
Maybe the question is what contracts can, because I do know there's some that can extend for a long time, but maybe it's the type of contracts. Is it tied to type of funding? These are the questions we need to put on the board. I should probably just write it.
Yes, it can be tied. It can be tied to type of funding. We're not allowed to like obligate funds that we don't have appropriation for. So a lot of times what we'll do is we'll do an initial 1-year or 2-year contract with opportunity to extend. And then if we get the funding, we have an easy path for extension. So that, again, we can share a whole bunch of information there.
Mm-hmm. And we've got some chat here. It sounds like OHA has figured out how to do some more than just 12 or 24 months funding limitations when it's not yet approved by the legislature. Okay, I'm going to move us on to the next one. So the next one is around sufficient reporting. So when we're thinking about reporting and reporting burdens, adequate lead time for changes to reporting within contracts, what are some of the questions that we have about reporting? And turn that into a recommendation. I was kind of asking the question like, when are we allowed to fund evaluation and reporting? Sometimes it seems like it's just kind of grouped and indirect, and maybe you can do it there. But I think I'm turning mine into just more of a recommendation that we need to, if we want good quality data and we want strong reports, it has to be part of what we're paying for. Oh, I love that question. What's done with the reports? The number of times I've known nonprofits to submit reports and then list to like a legislative committee, and there people saying we don't know where the money went. I'm like, how? Where'd all those receipts go? Where'd all those reports go? I would love to know this, like maybe it's different, obviously it's different agency by agency, but if departments do like report evaluation, do data evaluation, like after you've collected all of this from all of your grantees, do you look at trying to find themes across the reports, trying to find trends, trying to find best practices to outcomes, consistency with things? Yeah, what's done with all those reports? I would say this is one that's top of mind for me around like dashboards that cut across multiple initiatives over time. Yeah, it's a very good point there, Dolly, around like when we don't know what's going to happen, what are we telling everybody else, right? I think again, the summer programming was a great example of watching that happen in real time with people losing jobs from youth development work because that summer funding wasn't going to come and trying to wait to the last minute. I think what we see is a lot of organizations trying to use whatever funds they can find to just keep going. The unknowing is a huge complication, I think. Okay. We've got 2 more in about 10 minutes or less than that, 2 more in 5 minutes. All right. Next one, payment models that prioritize full cost recovery. This is not agreement, it's a question. I want to know about contracts and grants that use, I'm spell this word wrong. Nope. Nope. Someone watching me spell in real time. Let's see. I can say that word. It looks like a couple of people, as we've moved through the pages, we've started seeing fewer initials or names on sticky notes. So just a reminder, to add your initial or name to your sticky note. And then I'm going to move us to the last one, a mechanism for ongoing review. High-level office of nonprofit partnership is my thought. That's a recommendation, not quite a question. I think that's okay, Marianne. I saw, if you feel like as we're moving through, maybe you put something in an earlier slide that is connected to a later slide. I think that's fine, right? Because we're going to kind of collect all of these and use them as a way of figuring out what kind of presentations do we need. So I actually think even if we see something repetitive in multiple slides, that's good. It just helps us get a sense of what information are people hungry for. So we're going to we only got 2 more minutes on this one. So thinking about your recommendations or your questions around a mechanism for ongoing review. And then as soon as I close this, we're going to then move into that executive session. Leah, I really appreciate that comment there about like when we're missing deadlines, it's a really big deal. When the other side is missing deadlines, it seems like there is no recourse. I would love if there's any department staff who can say, if you're managing a program and your contract is 30, 60, 90 days not paid, does anything happen inside your department? Who talks to who? Does anybody throw up a red flag?
It's like going to the dentist. If you forget your appointment, you get charged anyway. But if they bump you, they just set a new appointment. It's kind of like that.
Indeed. Okay, it is 11:40. So I'm going to close this activity. Of course, like we mentioned, in every meeting, we're going to have an opportunity for additional agenda topics and things to identify. So this isn't like the last time that we can talk about some of these questions that we might have, but this was our big brainstorm. So now I'm going to ask everybody, we're going to be leaving this meeting and we're going to be going to a separate link for the executive session. So you're going to close out here. You should have the other link for the executive session in your email from Amy. It looks like the most recent one came at 7:34 this morning. So please close out here. And this is just for the task force members. So task force members, please join that other meeting and then we will come back here to adjourn.
Hi, Amy. Hopefully they're on their way over. So we just need 7 of us to be able to adjourn.
It looks like there's at least 7 of us.
Yes, welcome back, everybody. So I did forget to read the executive session thing, so I'm going to read it just so that I did it. and then we'll adjourn. So the task force will convene or did convene an executive session pursuant to ORS 192.660 2F to consult with legal counsel concerning written legal advice from counsel, which is privileged information under ORS 40.225. Executive sessions are closed to the public, and no final actions or final decisions will be made or were made in the executive session. When action is necessary, the task force will return to the open public session pursuant to Oregon Revised Statute 192.6604. Members of the news media will be allowed to attend or could have attended, but will be directed not to report on or disclose the specific information disclosed in the executive session. Thank you, everybody, for participating in the executive session and for participating in the task force meeting. We are now adjourned.
Thank you. Bye,
Thank you,
bye.
Mercedes.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Mercedes.
Bye-bye.